Hello and welcome to ShePack. I'm your host, Lanice Wolf, and today I'm joined by Elle Zoma, a cybersecurity recruitment consultant at Stanton House. And in today's episode, we're discussing Elle's unyielding ambition and really her story of empowerment and success. Elle, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. We've been speaking about this for a while, so I'm very excited that we are now finally recording it.
Yeah, what makes me actually, when you said that, what makes me even more excited is we were talking, I was telling you about this idea I had of starting a podcast, and you were like, I have a story. I would love to be on it. And maybe that was almost shy of a year ago.
Yeah. I think it was about a year ago. And I remember when you were telling me sort of the premise for the podcast and what you wanted to achieve. And I was like, wow, have you heard my story? And I thought it could hopefully be helpful for people as well.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited. And like I said in your intro, you are a recruiting consultant. And so I think all of us are hoping you have some kind of crystal ball and can share how are things looking in the market for cybersecurity 2024?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I wish I had a crystal ball as well, but I can definitely give you some indicators on the market. And I think it's also probably worth highlighting the area that I specialize in cybersecurity is specifically partnering with the pre-IPO vendors on the go-to-market side of the house. So just bear in mind that if anyone's listening, that is where a lot of my statistics and data will be coming from. But in short, it's not as bad as it was. I'll start off with that. Do I think that we're absolutely in the green and everything's hunky-dory and it's going to be a booming year? No. But do I think it's better than 2023? Absolutely. So, last year was a really incredibly difficult year for so many companies, especially in the technology space, even deeper in the security space. And a lot of people, of course, have unfortunately been laid off. And what I will say is that it's been a relatively, and I say this with sympathy, an unforgiving market for some people, because there are a lot of people who have found themselves out of work for a very, very long time. And so what I think is important to recognize is that it's about opportunity, time, and people. So it's about the right person at the right time and the right opportunity. And sometimes those things can take a really long time to kind of fall in place. However, there has been an uptick in hiring, certainly on, as I said, the go-to-market side of the house with the cyber vendors that we've been partnering with. And some of the data that we tend to look at to try and quantify how well the market is doing, there's a few different ways, but typically it's jobs in and obviously our quarterly target. So our jobs in this quarter alone, which of course has only been for us 2 months, between three of us pulled in between 30 to 40 jobs on the go-to-market team alone. We've actually already achieved 160% of our quarterly target, which is an incredible start to the year. I work with some exceptionally talented individuals, so really, really proud of the team that we've done so well. And I'd say that the majority of that is on the sales side. So it's always a good 50% the individual contributors, but I'd say probably about 25% has seen some of the sales leadership roles, and the remainder has been really divvied up between areas around product marketing, RevOps, and sales engineering. So there's been a lot of deferred hiring. Normally we see a scramble to get people in towards the end of a year so that people can be ready for SKO, they can start to ramp up and so forth. But it feels as though a lot of that was very longed out over last quarter. And now we've seen it really bleed into Q1, now going into Q2 as well. So not all bad, but again, with sympathy, there are people out there who are still struggling, still part of layoffs, but that's what we've been seeing.
Yeah, well, I think in terms of results, hitting 160%, just given kind of the year we were ending with, it certainly does seem optimistic, because I keep forgetting we're just in March. Yeah. So it's 3 months into the new year, and depending on what your company's fiscal calendar year looks like. I think so far optimistic, and I'm going to continue to keep my fingers crossed for all of our friends who are looking. But let's, I think when we kicked off in the beginning of this podcast, it was really talking about your story. And let's kick off with the early beginnings of it. Now, can you share more about just your upbringing and maybe challenges that you faced during your childhood.
Yeah, definitely. And I always like to kind of preface this by saying that, I appreciate that there are individuals out there who have had an upbringing, that might well be worse off than mine, and in some cases perhaps better than mine. So everyone has a different story that they bring to the table. So it's by no means I've had an awful life and woe is me, get my violin out. But definitely there have been some challenges. So, I mean, the biggest thing was growing up with a mum who was incredibly poorly. So my mum actually had ulcerative colitis. In short, she's now actually got an ileostomy bag on her stomach. But to get to that place, she had to go through 27 operations. And a lot of that was when I was a child growing up. My father at the time wasn't too around. He would be very focused on work or other areas of his life that he deemed probably more important. So often was the case is that I would be with a childminder, and I had a childminder who was lovely. So I definitely wasn't mistreated, but there was a daughter that she had who was only 18 months older than me. And so watching her grow up with her mum, doing all the things that I wanted my mum to be able to be there to do was very, very difficult. And I actually attribute my insomnia to when I was a child, because I have very vivid memories of lying in bed at night. I had my teddy bear called Yogi. I had my blankie with me, and my eyes would just be wide awake. And I would often be wondering, is my mum going to survive or not, because she was that sick, and actually her illness wasn't probably that well known back in those days, and so she suffered quite a lot. So that was some of the challenges, is that the traditional foundations that one would hope to have with a mother who can be around is definitely not for want of lack, not wanting it. She wanted to, but she couldn't, and not having at least the other parent there to be able to help create that safe haven. So yeah, that's kind of the challenges piece.
Yeah, well, and I can only imagine how difficult it is to not have your mom, and assuming she's probably in the hospital majority of the time, and your father kind of, as you had mentioned, had been absent. Now, childminder, that's equivalent to a nanny, is what I assume in the US.
Yes, sorry, I should remember that. I remember it here. So yes, a nanny, a nanny basically. Although I wouldn't be in my own home, I would go and stay actually in her house. So it's slightly different as well. So not only are you without, I guess, your parents around, but you're actually not even in the comfort of your own home. So I would often stay with her, stay in her daughter's bedroom. She'd make up a little bed for me next to hers. So yes, it's similar as a nanny.
Yeah. Well, and how do you feel like that absence of that, you kind of mentioned the traditional support system. How do you feel like that shaped your perspective on independence and self-sufficiency?
I think it reinforced how important it is to be self-sufficient and to have independence. I think that there are times where perhaps it's to the extreme, in all honesty, because, at the ripe old age of 31, I've probably got myself to a place where I'm so incredibly self-sufficient that I don't actually want to let anyone in to give me a hand. And I don't think that that's necessarily always the healthiest way of living. But it really did highlight to me that it is important that you rely on yourself. I think as humans, nobody is perfect. And you only let yourself down if you expect that of other people. And if you hold other people to the same standards that you have. So it really made me perceive the world as a place where I've only got myself to rely on. It's only me that I trust 100%. And I would even say that about my own mother, my own father, my own other family members. But I don't blame them for it. It's because they're human. So not being able to trust them 100% is because they are human. And so if I rely on myself, it's only myself that I can say well done to, and only myself that I can blame if something doesn't go right.
Mm-hmm. Tell me this, how old were you when you started to kind of stay with with the childminder?
Gosh, I would have been probably from the age of around 5, 6 is actually when it
Mm-hmm.
first started. I remember I don't remember too much before the age of 5, but I have very vivid memories of my mum always being very ill and always needing to be in hospital and having an operation. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember the first time that I saw her with an ileostomy bag. And I mean, if you've never seen someone that's got one, I mean, literally part of your intestine is out of your stomach. And as a child,
Oof.
it was very strange to see, but I remember saying to her, it looks like a tongue mummy, that's all. Like very, very blasé, or at least I tried to be. But yeah, it was probably around 5 or 6 when that started.
Yeah, so you started really early in kind of realizing that you're building this really resilience. And you had mentioned even just that pivotal moment when you realized that you needed to rely solely on yourself. So, can you describe more of that experience and even just the emotions that come with it, especially, starting out as a child of 5 years old?
Yeah, so obviously the resilience, I'm sure, started to kind of kick in from that age. But the point at which I truly realised I never wanted to ask someone ever again for anything probably was by the time I had reached about, I want to say 15, 16.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking quite candidly, I love my father, but my father was someone who had multiple affairs when I was growing up. And there was one in particular that ended up meaning he divorced my mum and pursued someone who was actually only 5 years older than me. And he would spend a huge amount of money on her, a lot. And I was always someone that made my own money. I was very, very money motivated. From the age of 13, I was cleaning offices. I was babysitting. I would iron my godfather's shirts for 50 pence a shirt every week until the age where I was legally allowed to get a proper job, which was the week before my 16th birthday. So I've never been one to want to take money from someone, but seeing my dad spend so much money on another girl who was near enough my age really, really hurt. And so I asked him, "Hey, Dad, I want to go and have a haircut. Would you mind? Would you mind if I asked you to pay for it?" And at the time, it was about £25 for a haircut. You don't get that anymore. But he said no, and I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, I don't need to spend money on your haircut." And I said, "But you spend money on her." And he said, "I'll spend my money on whoever I want to spend it on." And in that moment, I mean, that's like a kick in the stomach. And I sit with that moment, and I will and have never since then asked anyone to buy me anything, to give me anything, to lend me money. I would rather be struggling than to ever have to go through that feeling of rejection again, that someone doesn't want to help me with something. And it's not about the haircut and the £25. It's about the reason behind it and the fact that you're willing to help someone else. So that was the pivotal moment for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, and even then, like you had mentioned before, what I am so kind of amazed by is even the person you've become now still has that level of empathy and knowing that we're all still human. We're going to make mistakes. But it very early for you. Not only did you become a hustler at the age of 13, but it did continue to establish that resilience and that just kind of power within yourself to take control of your life. And, if we kind of go into that, you spoke about this a little bit, but was that moment of realization? How did you approach challenges and opportunities throughout your life, just given that experience you had?
Yeah, I mean, I think again to preface before I go into this, I'm definitely a very emotional person, and I wear my heart on my sleeve. So when I have challenges and obstacles to come over, I can guarantee you it's not without tears, it's not without fear, it's not without panic, anxiety. That definitely is a huge part of who I am. It's in my DNA. But for me, failure is simply not an option. And so anytime I have had a challenge or an obstacle to overcome, no matter how many tears I might cry before I face something head on, or how long it takes me to get there, I do get there in the end, because my ego is probably too big to ever let me fail myself. So that's kind of really, I guess, how I tend to tackle things. It's that overarching failure is not an option, but I guarantee I do have a cry for sure.
But I love how you said that, because I do think it's important to go through the emotions and feel them. And it was a very vulnerable, just kind of statement that that is still present. It doesn't change the fact of the outcomes of what you are determined to achieve. Now, if we start to think about where you are today, what drew you to your first significant opportunity at Stanton House? And how did you come or overcome the fear of stepping into the unknown?
Yeah, so what drew me to the opportunity at Stanton House, firstly, is before I joined the company, I was working at a spa in the UK, which was great for a few years of trying to figure out what I wanted to do post university, make friends, and it was a very nice environment. However, I quite quickly realized that I was not utilizing my brain, that there was no career progression, and quite frankly, I was very fed up with not making the type of money that I wanted to be making, and I'd had enough. So a friend of mine actually introduced me to Stanton House, and at the time they were hiring a compliance coordinator. And I had no idea what that was. And then she showed me the description, I read it, and I still had no idea what that was. And I was like, my goodness. So it's fine. I will interview. So they interviewed me, and I actually even remember thinking, I hope that they don't offer me, because I was quite scared to make the jump. But they offered me, and thank God they did, because it's been the best decision that I've ever made. And although it was scary, I was like, do you know what? The spa is always going to be there. So I might as well go and try this. So that's how I was actually introduced to Stanton House. I think it was probably a few months in of being a compliance coordinator, which, for if anyone isn't sure what that is, I basically was responsible for drawing up everyone's contracts, paperwork. We had a heavy interim business back in the UK. So whenever the recruiters would place a contractor, I was supporting a lot with the compliance around that. But very quickly is when I realized, I see what these recruiters are doing, and they're not all slimy salespeople like I would initially have perceived, recruiters to be. They actually are decent and care, but they're also making really good money. And as someone who is highly motivated by making money and being successful myself, I raised my hand and said, I want to do what they're doing. I want to do that. So yeah, that's I moved into being a recruiter, and I can tell you about that if you want more info. But yeah, that's the how I got into Stanton House story.
Yeah, I am curious, because you were saying, your friend had introduced you to them, and at one point you were like, please don't offer me the role. And then they did. So what was some of the criteria that you used to determine, hey, should I leave the current setup I have behind? Or no, I should pursue it. What was the process and criteria used to finally say, yes, I will take on this supporting role?
Yeah, so the first, obviously, kind of surface level is from the salary. So the salary was offering me an uplift on what I would have been making at the spa. But for me, it was more about the kind of career opportunity, the chance to actually, again, engage my brain, feel as though I was doing something that was stretching the muscle that is the brain again. And quite frankly, when you do work in hospitality, as much as I loved the people there, you are just a number amongst hundreds of other employees. That is all you are. And so there is no real care as to, okay, what is this person's trajectory? What impact can they have on our company, but also what impact can we have on their career? It just doesn't exist, really. And I also didn't want to be scarred with the what if. I would rather go and try working at Stanton House. And if after a year I really didn't like it, as I said, the spa was always going to be there. And in fact, actually, for the first year, because I was, really having trouble letting it go, and I was quite obsessed with working, I stayed on at the spa as a 0 hours contractor, so that in the evenings or the weekends or any time that we had public holidays, if I wanted to pick up shifts, I could go and do that. So I actually gave myself a year of like tackling both. And then it got to the point that I was like, okay, I can stop killing myself now. I think I've established that this is something good.
Yeah. Well, but what I like about that too is like you literally listed out. It's almost like a pros and cons, but it gave you, that opportunity to go ahead and take a risk because you knew you had options. And if it didn't work out, then you would find something else. But you also put in the extra time and effort to kind of expand. And you talked about, you had that career opportunity and it gave you also that opportunity to stretch yourself. And so let's talk about the transition because you're not in a supporting role anymore. What led you from that supporting role to this kind of fee earning position in sales? Tell us more about what it was like to advocate for yourself in a space where that type of transition was really a first for the company.
Yeah, and you know what? I perceive it's probably not just for Stanton House, but I would imagine that if you were to speak to any other recruitment firm out there, or perhaps even any other kind of sales organization, the idea of moving someone from what is deemed more of an operational support administrative role into something where you have to sell, whether it's selling technology, selling services, people, it's a bit of a scratch your head. Can that person do that? Are they that way inclined? So I was the first person that did that at Stanton House. And of course, there was, I'm sure, a level of apprehension just by virtue of the fact that they had not had someone who wanted to do that previously. I think they wanted to make sure that I was aware that, hey, I wasn't just going to be able to move into a role just because I worked for the company. They wanted to ensure that I fully understood what I was getting myself into. So for a month, they had me shadow all of the consultants, which I was very happy to do. And when you are working in a an environment that's revenue generating, you'll know that it often involves working slightly longer hours when you need to, working over a lunch or anything like that. So anytime that I could stay late in the evening to observe meetings, anytime that I could practice writing out job adverts, going through resumes, I did it all because I wanted to immerse myself entirely in it. After that month, and they said, still interested? And I was like, yep. They put me through some interviews. So I remember I interviewed with probably 4 or 5 of our senior executive leadership team. And they put me through my paces just because I'd always displayed that I was a relatively heart on sleeve person. And I guess they were concerned about the resilience. So I went through those interviews, and safe to say I clearly must have done a very good job. But there was a question on, okay, where is there space for Elle? And one of the teams that I knew I really wanted to work on in the UK didn't currently have space for me. And so I spoke to the person who headed up that team, and I said to her, and her name's Kate, and I said to Kate, hey, look, I know you've not got any space right now, but I'd love to know if this is going to work up front. And I'd really appreciate if you take the time to interview me. And if you think at some point you can see me being someone that could add value to your team, then at least I know that as soon as the space comes up, I'm ready, you're ready, and we can rock and roll. And if not, at least we're already aware of it. So she was like, okay, I'll give you a shot. So I interviewed with her. The next day, before it was even 8:30 a.m., she sat me down in a meeting room and she said, I want to offer you a job and I want you to join my team straight away.
That's amazing.
So I think, and look, one would have to ask her this, but I think what she took from everything that I had displayed was that I was so incredibly determined to make this work. And when you've got a fire in your belly and you've got that one personal motivator that makes you wake up every single morning and say, I am going to tackle this and I am not going to fail, she knew that that was something that you can't teach. So she taught me the basics of being an incredibly talented recruiter, but the grit in me and that desire and that that full kind of knowledge of, I will do this, just you watch me, was enough to make her know she's worth taking a punt on. So I hope, Kate, if you're ever listening to this, you're glad that you did.
Yay, Kate. But I think that's an incredible accomplishment because, like we mentioned, this wasn't something, whether it's at Stanton House or somewhere else, it wasn't a typical move. And of course, there is going to be some concerns and doubts. But, from my perspective of what I heard is you took that skepticism and you combined it with your determination and your grit and your persistence, which found that opportunity with Kate to not take no for an answer, but still find ways of where you can insert yourself, which, just that conversation alone, it wasn't you giving up. And already the next day she had an opportunity for you, which is, again, it speaks to your persistence, your grit, your determination, and your resilience all packaged into one.
Yeah. And I think just to, on the back of that, or off the back of that rather, for anyone sat there thinking that I relied just on my sort of resilience alone, please be rest assured that in the back of my head, there is a little voice that's saying, can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. So that is still there, but your drive has to be bigger than that to combat that voice. But it is still there in the background.
Yeah. Well, let's double click on that though. So you had mentioned you still have that kind of, that negative voice that it happens. Everybody has one. How do you handle that doubt now, both kind of within and even from others?
Yeah. So do you know what? Interestingly, I think that that doubt probably comes more from within than from others. I think there are a lot of people around me, thankfully, who wholeheartedly have absolute belief in what I can achieve. And really most of the doubt kind of comes from myself. And I'd be lying if I said I'd had that totally figured out and had that nailed, because I don't. The truth is that the imposter syndrome is real. It is for many people, but it's something that I have to really, really work on to not let it give me paralysis in what I'm doing. We're in roles where it's a roller coaster. You can have 1, 2, 3 months where you're absolutely flying and everything is fantastic, and then you can have a quarter where it's literally head in hand moment all the time, and you think, gosh, give me a break. So it's not easy. So firstly, I ensure that I am surrounded by people that do believe in me, but I also have to be very cognizant that I don't project too much on those individuals, because that isn't fair to them, but also doesn't serve me to kind of try and, sit in this way of feeling. So in all honesty, it's kind of like you have to kind of kick it out of you. And sometimes it's a mental click. And that's not really something I can tangibly kind of, put out there and say, if you do X, Y, Z, then you'll be able to get rid of it. But just trust that if you have enough of that desire and that self-belief, it will override the feeling of doubt. And if you also keep doing the things that you need to be doing. So I've been reading a book recently called Atomic Habits by James Clear. And one of the things that he speaks about is, don't just focus on the end goal. The end goal, the outcome, that will happen and take care of itself. Focus on the system that you put in place. So even if nothing is coming right for you and you're not getting the outcome you want, you've got to keep doing all of the stuff that that you should be doing, and just trust that it will come. Like, it's a process for a reason. Another thing that I do, which is a little bit more tangible / maybe sentimental, is I live in a really beautiful high-rise apartment in downtown Chicago, in which I'm incredibly grateful for. But when I look around, everything I see in every corner, every crevice is me. This is what I have achieved. So for any moment that I doubt my ability, I remind myself, you literally did all of this. Anything that is inside this door, this whole entire apartment, you have achieved, and you need to remember that. So it's things like that I utilize to try and help those moments of doubt.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to summarize it because I think those points are so incredibly powerful. I think one, building a village around you that is going to give you that positive energy. I think the other thing that you had mentioned that's an important call out is to not, I forgot the word you used in it, but to not project too much on that village, which is like, I think it's incredibly mindful, and it goes back to your level of empathy. The other piece was the book, which I'll include in our show notes, on Atomic Habits, of not just focusing on the end goal, but focusing on the system that you're going to put in place to then your last one. And I think it's, to sum that up, it's really celebrating your successes. It's so easy, and everyone has that kind of negative talk track that can come into their head. But I think when you stop and look around at everything that you have in place, those are things that you put in place. And it should be celebrated and continue to remind yourself. So I had to just summarize those because I thought they were incredibly powerful. Now, you did mention that we can all hear an accent, and you said that you're in Chicago. Mm-hmm. So you made an international move, which was a completely bold step. Mm-hmm. And, what motivated you to take that leap, and how did you prepare for it, both mentally and emotionally?
Yeah, it was a very, very bold move, and, one that I'm super grateful that I've had the opportunity to do, because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who would love to do that and don't get the access to do that. So, I'd always been open to the idea of moving internationally. I think people who uproot themselves from their hometown, their home comforts, the people that they've grown up with, and move to a place where they don't know anyone, that is a huge test of someone's character and resilience and their ability to be a go-getter and build something from scratch. And I knew that not only would it be tremendous for my own personal life, but from a career perspective, it was just such a valuable opportunity that I had no doubt and have no doubt helps me grow into this incredibly diligent and highly driven businesswoman. So I'd always known that I wanted to have that experience, and I'd actually always had my sights set on the US. I didn't know how. Speaking candidly, if you know much about visas, it's not the easiest to get one for the US, to be honest with you. But I knew one day that I'd make it here. I'd never thought about Chicago. I'd never even thought about visiting Chicago, let alone living here. But this is where our US headquarters are. So I went with it. I'm very grateful for someone who's both a friend, but also the person I report into, Josh. He was one of my biggest cheerleaders for me coming out here. And actually, he also is British, and he also used to work in our UK office. And whether he remembers this or not, but there was a time when I was making the transition into being a recruiter instead of a support person. He said to me, "Do you know what, Elle? I think you're a dark horse, and I think that you are going to achieve great things." And I think he, as someone who was already doing the sales role, to hear that from him was very encouraging. And so he picked that up, from when we were discussing about me coming out here, and it was kind of a no given. Be on my team, come help me grow this, come help me do this. And, he achieved a huge amount before I got here, just to say that. He definitely was the catalyst for it all. And despite the fact that I'm sure I'm sometimes a pain in his backside, I hope and believe that he's very happy that I'm here as well.
So reflecting on your path now, what advice would you give to young women who may be facing similar doubts or challenges?
Yeah, the advice that I would give is to try and not let the little voice in your head that tells you that you can't do something become bigger than it needs to be. I think that as women, we need to be our biggest advocate, and I think it's really important, because I perceive that there are some women out there who may well be very reliant on either their family or perhaps even their partner for support. And you hear so many horror stories of where, 1 minute you think that you're in a happy, loving marriage, family's great, everything's wonderful. The female doesn't have any sight of the finances or what's going on at all. And then suddenly, boom, divorce happens, and you find yourself stuck. So I think if you have that in mind, and I know that that sounds really incredibly negative, and I'm sure there's a lot of therapists out there that would say we should unpack that, but I think it's being very realistic, is that you need to be self-sufficient. You need to have things on the back burner or happening that you have created for yourself, so that you are keeping yourself safe and your potential future children safe. Do not rely on anyone. So I would just say to females to not let the doubt creep in, and also don't let anyone else's doubt kind of shut you down. If it happens, use that to fuel you. Going back to my ego, if I ever have any sniff of doubt around me, do you know what? It's probably the best thing that person could ever do for me, because I'm too egotistical to let them win on something like that. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Oh, that's really good advice. And I think it's practical advice in a sense of you own almost your own career path in life. And I think it's so important that you continue to remind yourself that piece. Now, the last question I will leave you with, my friend, is in a world full of possibilities, what mark do you dream of leaving as a trailblazer for future generations of empowered women? What
a question. Wow. And it's such a powerful one, and it's one that I want to get right when I answer it. And I think there's so much that could be answered around this. But if I'm drawing on my own experience, I think leaving my mark is knowing is allowing people to know that you fight for what you want, and you fight for yourself, and you never let anyone tell you that you can't do something. And I wholeheartedly believe that. And anytime anyone's ever told me, not sure, I show them that they no longer need to be not sure. So I think that traditionally men probably have an easier time having that level of assertiveness and confidence, and I think females traditionally don't always, or if they do, it then gets perceived perhaps in a slightly more negative perception than if a male is like that. So ignore that noise and be your biggest advocate, and know that if you've got enough of that fire in your belly, like, you have to do it for yourself. You really, really do. And that's what I just would want to leave with anyone that's listening to this. Like, please be your biggest war hero.
Oh, I love that. Elle, you told me you had an amazing story, and I literally just got chills after you said that, because you have a phenomenal story. I think it's a story of independence, but it's wrapped in this empathy and love, and has that grit and determination that all of us, we need to be either reminded or continue to know that we can look within ourselves, and we do have that grit and grace to really build out our path. So thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast. And as we wrap up today's episode, let's remember that in supporting one another, we amplify our strengths and we break down barriers. So let's go out there, champion your dreams, empower your peers, and continue to shape a future where every woman realizes her true potential. Until next time, see ya.